Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Tensions are rising on the Korean Peninsula as Seoul, South Korea, the U.S. and Japan begin joint military drills under the banner Freedom Edge. North Korea fired back with sharp threats, warning of serious consequences. And at the same time, Pyongyang is advancing its military posture, doubling down on both nuclear and conventional forces, all while leaning more heavily on China and Russia. With Seoul stepping up diplomacy and the UN General Assembly just days away, all eyes are on what North Korea is planning next and whether quiet backchannels with Washington might reopen. For a deeper discussion on this, we are joined in the studio by Dr. Go Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Good to see you.
Good evening.
And also joining us online is Mark Barry, Associate Editor Emeritus at the International Journal on World Peace. Good to see you, Dr. Barry.
Good to see you, and good evening.
So let's start right away. So with Dr. Go, so like I've said, the Freedom Edge has started, and North Korea called this a reckless show of force and also hinted that it could bring serious consequences also. How would you read into such kind of response? Do you think this signals any future military action?
Well, I think it's a little bit different from that. I think North Korea, with the recent visit to Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing on the occasion of the Victory Day celebrations, and I think he was pushing this narrative of North Korea, China, and Russian bloc consolidation, meaning that the three authoritarian regimes were aligned together and together confronting the rising security cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. And even though this particular exercise that's taking place, the Freedom Edge, is more of a multi-domain combined exercise between Korea, Japan, and the United States, and it's less specifically focused on North Korea than, say, like trying to establish a regional stability in East China Sea. North Korea is reacting this way because I think North Korea is trying to send a message that it's siding with China on this one. That when even though Freedom Edge exercise is quite different in characteristics than the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise that just concluded last month, which is really focused on North Korea. North Korea, I think, wants to continue with the narrative that I unveiled in Beijing like earlier this month, to send a message less about warning, a message to Seoul or Washington or Tokyo. It's more of a message of solidarity with Beijing. And perhaps it's also setting the ground to justify its potential upcoming missile test. Because before Kim Jong-un, before going to Beijing, he had, the North Korean regime had unveiled the news that they are developing a new ICBM called the Hwasong-20. So, and that's obviously a pretext to carry out a live exercise, testing exercise with the new ICBM. So, and I think it's likely that North Korea is going to rationalize its illegal nuclear development and missile development on the ground that it's essentially part of North Korea's effort to rise up to the challenge of the security coordination that's taking place between Korea, Japan, and the United States in this region.
Right, so it's more like showing solidarity with Beijing rather than a message to South Korea and Washington. But this message actually wasn't just sent to outsiders. The same warning has been ran in the Rodong Sinmun the next day. So Dr. Barry, why do you think he'd tell their own people? What's the internal signal then?
Well, because there's more to come with North Korea and Russia. And even though very recently Kim Jong-un has been blaming Russia for the higher North Korean casualties in the war in Ukraine, the reality is that Kim spent a lot more time with President Putin. Even Putin took his jacket off, rolled up his sleeves in Beijing, and less time with Xi Jinping. And I think they're discussing about future plans for the rest of 2025 and 2026. Obviously, Russian intentions are now to put pressure on Poland, on the Baltic states, on Romania, We saw drones overflying and being shot down several NATO countries. We saw the GPS jamming of European EU commissioner's plane when it was trying to land in Bulgaria. So I think what Putin is basically telling Kim Jong-un is you're my ally, and you're going to be backfilling a lot of things I need on Russian territory, and therefore, at the same time, it's setting up North Korea to have certain privileges within that relationship. It may raise the tensions, but in any case, North Korea is telling its people internally that this is the new dynamic in the world, and he's not only with a strong relationship with Putin, but also publicly, at least with President Xi. So it's kind of a new ball game, is what he's telling his people.
Right, so highlighting their new kind of alignment. That's what we could see. Now, meanwhile, Kim Jong-un actually is outlining next year's strategy as well. He plans to push both nuclear and conventional force development at the 9th Party Congress. Dr. Go, why the shift to conventional weapons? Do you think it's a lesson that he learned from participating in the Ukraine war?
Well, there are two factors behind the announcement by Kim Jong-un and on the refocus on the conventional capability development. I think it's both part of the weapons development roadmap that North Korea had proposed 5 years ago on the 8th Party Congress. Back then, North Korea had revealed that they wanted to develop a weapon system and different types of weapon systems, ranging from strategic, meaning nuclear and missiles, to conventional weapons. But then I think there's also an opportunistic element here, which is clearly the war in Ukraine, the window of opportunity that opened up for North Korea through this cooperation with Russia. Russia evidently supplied North Korea with some cutting-edge weapon systems, especially in the conventional kind. Likely because Russia doesn't want to help North Korea with nuclear weapons, because it will be in clear violation of its duty as a permanent member of the United Nations, even though it's already in violation of such obligation. So I think there's a red line for Russia of not supplying nuclear weapons. Instead, Russia supplied conventional systems to North Korea. So that opened up an opportunity for North Korea to achieve its stated objective of enhancing its conventional capability that was right down 5 years ago. And we have to remember that with the new 9th Party Congress, North Korea will have to essentially report, to themselves, to the public, how many of the objectives that had outlined 5 years ago have been met. And the conventional weapons capability is clearly an area that North Korea probably surpassed its initial expectations, thanks to the war in Ukraine. So, and I think, and there's that element, the political element. Another element is that North Korea had realized that nuclear weapons are great deterrents, but at the same time, they're impossible to use. So having nuclear weapons clearly prevents other outside powers from intervening in the conflict in the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time, North Korea cannot use nuclear weapons, because that would actually invite the United States and other countries to attack North Korea or respond to the attack with the same kind of weapons, which is nuclear, and in an exchange that North Korea cannot win. So I think North Korea understood about this downside of having nuclear capability only at the expense of a conventional capability. So now they're trying to catch up on the conventional side as well.
So that explains their double-track approach now. Now, regarding these kinds of moves at the IAEA, that Washington has reaffirmed denuclearization. North Korea fired back at this, saying its nuclear status is irreversible. Dr. Berry, do you think this could be a warning to Washington ahead of possible talks?
Well, it's a warning that whatever happens, whether there's ever talks in the second Trump term or not, the nuclear weapons are here to stay. I think Kim Jong-un's main goal is to stop American and joint exercises in the region. but particularly with the ROK and ideally with Japan. I think he takes offense at that. And as I said on other occasions on this program, there was an understanding in 2018 and 2019 that the United States would cease exercises, and in exchange, North Korea would cease testing intermediate and long-range missiles and cease testing nuclear weapons. And Kim believes that he's kept to his end of the bargain and has not done so this year, except for some, short-range missiles that are not part of the agreement. And President Trump pretends that it's still the Biden policy towards North Korea. So my feeling is that he's just setting down the line. But I think that Kim Jong-un is of two minds about meeting Trump, which is that he personally feels that there is a relationship there. But he also feels that he looks out and he sees the current tragic state of U.S. ROK relations, even just in the last 3 weeks. And he says, I can't afford to make a deal with this man because he could change his mind at any time and for any reason. I'm safer with Vladimir Putin, even though that is not a long-term relationship either. So he's making these tough choices, but my feeling is that he's basically saying the nuclear program is not negotiable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a stance that's not changing from North Korea, we're seeing. Now, North Korea's diplomacy is also shifting. So at China's Victory Day, reports say that Pyongyang asked China and Russia to back its break from peaceful unification. How did you read into this?
So, in order to provide a background to this, North Korea had come out with a new doctrine of non-unification now called the two hostile states doctrine. So what it means in a nutshell is that North Korea will consider South Korea as an enemy state and no longer as part of the same Korean nation. So this is a very hostile and aggressive doctrine. Doesn't really make sense in many ways, especially contradicts North Korea's previous stance as a sole most legitimate representation of the Korean nation in the Korean Peninsula, which gave North Korea self-granted status as the most legitimate nationalistic Korea in the Korean Peninsula compared to the South. And then I think North Korea is taking this doctrine and explaining it to its ally, China and Russia, not as a step to get their approval or support, because China and Russia have important relations with South Korea. So this is a moment when we can contrast South Korea's allies from North Korean allies. South Korean allies, United States and Japan, don't have diplomatic relations with North Korea, whereas the North Korean allies have the Korean relations with the South. So they have to be more careful. They have to play a more of a balancing act between North and South. So North Korea is fully aware of this, that China is in a bind by having to support this very aggressive antagonistic position that North Korea has just developed for themselves. So what the North Korea is doing essentially is taking the first step to mount a subtle pressure on Beijing and Moscow to recognize North Korea as the most important Korea of the two Koreas, even though economically, politically, technologically, it's a backward country compared to the South. So they attach the first subtle step. And second is essentially starting the motion to forcing these allies of North Korea to take sides between the two Koreas. So even though it looks very, negligible move on the part of North Korea, and then the Chinese statement that came out after the bilateral meeting between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping shows it. The Chinese statement doesn't recognize any remark about the two hostile states doctrine that North Korea is pushing right now, clearly showing that China disagrees with it. But this is the first step towards a motion, and then North Korea expects that China and Russia would eventually put North Korea before South Korea sometime in the future.
Right. So then with these kinds of efforts from, North Korea, these kinds of bold moves, Dr. Baird, do you think a real alliance between North Korea, China, and Russia could be forming? And how far could this go?
No, I think it's mostly kind of a posturing. However, we should, in a sense, give credit to North Korea that they wouldn't be there Certainly you wouldn't have had the front row of being Xi, Putin, and Kim Jong-un if North Korea were not one of the world's four, what I would call ICBM powers. In other words, you have not only the nuclear weapons, but the ability to deliver intercontinental ballistic missiles. But of course, at the same time, Kim was there because of his strong relationship with Putin, and Putin is never someone to misjudge or to belittle in any way. But overall, I think that all three countries are actually much weaker than they appear. And to add to the cake, to add to the mix, so to speak, the United States also is, I think, much weaker than many people believe. And the kind of haughty and arrogant behavior of the United States, I mean, just look at the example of how President Trump treated India. And simply because of allegedly purchasing oil from Russia, but the actual reason being to raise the tariffs to 50% were because Prime Minister Modi refused to give Trump the credit for settling the tensions between India and Pakistan. So it's a very corrupt system among the major powers. The United States is not looking as good as it thinks it is. And in fact, I should note at this juncture that I think that based on what happened last week, we are now living in what I would call the post-Charlie Kirk era. And this event, this tragedy last week, deeply affected President Trump, even more deeply affected Vice President Vance, who took over Kirk's radio show on Monday. And we should note that one of the last appearances 5 days earlier before his death was in South Korea by Charlie Kirk. And so there's a lot of potential underlying tensions. All four countries, North Korea, China, Russia, United States, have a lot of weaknesses which are barely being disguised under the surfaces. And it's really anyone's guess exactly what turn events may take in the months ahead.
Right. So with this latest uncertain developments, it's still unclear how far this cooperation could actually go. Now, on the other side, for South Korea, it's engaging with Beijing. Just a couple of hours ago, Seoul's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun sat down with his Chinese counterpart to discuss North Korea as well. Dr. Go, do you think this could be a chance to show how close China and Pyongyang really are?
Well, I think that China is already playing a balancing act, despite of what happened in earlier in this month and the Victory Day parade, when Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, they stood side by side at the front of the pack at the parade. Even though the optics projects solidarity among these countries, as Barry pointed out, Dr. Barry pointed out, they are not as close as they seem because there are clearly structural reasons they cannot get too close. For instance, the economic exchange among these three countries is very little compared to the single trade volume between Korea and South Korea, let alone the United States or Japan. So there are clear limitations to it. So China is very conscious of it. The reality is that South Korea is more important to China than North Korea is. But having said that, I think China also wants to get some message from Seoul about President Lee's very successful visit to Washington last month. Clearly, President Lee sent a very clear signal to the United States, also to China, which side South Korea stands right now, and that's with the United States. And it's not a message that China wants to hear so clearly coming from a new president in South Korea. So I think Minister Cho went to Beijing to level the playing field, so to speak, reset the relations, and then tell the Chinese that China is still very important to South Korea, which it is. And so I think this is going to be a full agenda item for the two ministers at this time and during this visit. And I think North Korea is not going to figure very highly. Yeah. Besides the perfunctory remarks that both sides are going to work together for the peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula.
So we'll see how things develop in the coming hours. Now, shifting gears, next week, Pyongyang will return to the UN. The regime will send a high-level delegation for the first time in 7 years. Dr. Barry, how would you read into this decision?
Well, they're splitting the difference. they're close allies with Russia. As we just discussed, they had a major appearance on the world stage at the Victory Day parade in Beijing. So they're sending, on one hand, I believe, a vice foreign minister, but they're not sending Madam Cho. They're not sending the foreign minister. So there's no way that President Trump will ever shake hands with a vice foreign minister. If Madam Cho came, he might, but he would say, "I want to meet your boss." If he met her in the hallway, and will have him get in touch with me, but she's not coming. So that's basically a message being sent that we want to raise our profile on the world stage at the United Nations. Particularly, it's the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations in 1945. But at the same time, they don't want to make President Trump think that there's anything in the back of their mind about what might be able to happen in late October or November in Korea. And I personally think that there will probably not be a meeting in the DMZ. And even if there were an offer for a meeting, I think Kim Jong-un would say, "I went to the South Korean side back in 2019. You come to the North side." And Trump would say, "Well, okay, but I want to bring a lot of media people." And Kim would say back, "Well, just bring one cameraman, one still photographer, and that's it." And Trump, of course, would probably say no. So I think the chances of anything like that happening are slim, but I do think at the United Nations, North Korea is trying to make the best of the situation without implying anything leaning too far in the direction of desiring a meeting at the highest level with President Trump.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that opinion, Dr. Barry. Now, what about Dr. Go? What do you think are the chances for a possible U.S.-North Korea contact at the UN?
I think Dr. Barry just provided an excellent analysis and prognosis of what could happen and the silence of the General Assembly meeting in New York. Yeah, I think it's unlikely that North Korea is going to make an offer to President Trump that's going to represent a breakthrough in the current impasse in dialogue or lack of thereof between Washington and Pyongyang. And I think North Korea is sending a high-level delegation for the first time in 7 years to the UN General Assembly, not because they want to establish channels of communication with the United States. I think it's because North Korea right now is engaged in a diplomatic blitz. Kim Jong-un went to Beijing, and they're sending other diplomats around the world, and because North Korea wants to re-engage the world, and this time around to be respected as a major nuclear power. And so that's the campaign they're engaged in, and they made it very clear what are the conditions for meeting with the U.S. president is for the United States to accept, for President Trump to accept North Korea as a nuclear power, and I don't think it's likely at this juncture at least. So yeah, I think it's unlikely.
So slim chances at this time. We'll have to see how things develop at the UN. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Dr. Go.
My pleasure.
And of course, Dr. Barry, we appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.